Joker is out in theaters now, and my new favorite thing is reading articles about it. Todd Phillips and his new film based off the DC Comics character played by Joaquin Phoenix has developed a lot of controversy, most of said controversy developing before the movie was even released. And many people have things to say, including me, so we're going to talk about it in spoiler form now because I already did a review, and if you saw my review, you know I really like this movie. I thought it was great as a Joker movie. I thought they hit all the beats really well, although it reminded me too much of Martin Scorsese films like Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, which I actually rewatched after seeing Joker recently, just to kind of get my bearings on how much was borrowed and how much was taken, and there's a lot. And it remains my biggest issue with the movie. I just wish that it was a little more original in regards to its structure. I don't think the way Todd Phillips helmed the movie is like the way Scorsese would direct a film. But story-wise, if you've ever seen Taxi Driver, you can basically see where the movie's going. One of my biggest concerns during the film was the idea that Arthur Fleck's mother may have had an affair with Thomas Wayne, and that in some way he's now related to Bruce Wayne. And at first I was like, that must be the risk that everyone's talking about. The people who saw it at festivals who were like, this movie's gonna destroy the planet! I was like, oh, is it because Batman and Joker are half-brothers now? But then later Arthur realizes that his mother is genuinely insane and she made all of this up and has been living in a fantasy world. So for a while I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I like that. I mean, I love when things are changed. I love when risks are taken in movies, but I just thought that was an odd idea, just to like make Batman and Joker straight up half-brothers. I guess it could create some interesting tension for future movies, but since they're not really saying this movie is going to connect to other films, that might be wasted anyway. So I was happy when it wasn't actually true, but at the same time, it felt like a bit of a diversion for the plot. But I couldn't really discuss that in my original video for obvious reasons, mega spoilers. But I actually do want to talk about some of those initial reactions that came out of festivals, and the way I feel about them, and we'll get into that in a second, but let's continue talking about the film. Phoenix is so terrific in this movie. There are so many scenes where I felt so terrible for this man. The biggest of which is when he finally gets his chance to do stand-up. And for like a minute, he can't even get his first joke out because he has this condition that causes uncontrollable laughter. I nearly cried. And it has nothing to do with siding with a mass murderer. It's because Phoenix is a phenomenal actor, one of the best of his generation. But they just got so many little beats with his character right. The idea that when he's first at this club and he's taking notes when another guy's up there doing stand-up, he's laughing at all the wrong times. He's kind of looking around like, why is everyone else laughing? That wasn't funny. But then he laughs at the wrong part. And you can tell that he's just completely disassociated with the rest of the world around him. There was quite a bit of talk and concern about the level of violence in this film before it was released to the public, and I was honestly expecting to see some really fucked up shit. Like I told my friend after the movie, I was fully expecting him to like rip a guy's jaw off or something, and there's nothing like that in this movie. In fact, the first actual killing that he does is against some men who may be rapists, who don't get the opportunity to commit this assault against a woman because he starts laughing and she flees into another tram. And then they start beating the shit out of him and he basically kills them and defends himself. But you can tell that he enjoys it, which is where the dangerous aspect starts to creep in that some people have felt while watching this movie, is the idea that this guy doesn't seem to have a problem with what he did. In fact, he even says that. There's a scene where he's trying to get medical information about his mother, and he's like, I did something bad, and I thought it was going to bother me, but it hasn't. And the dude behind the counter is like, what's that? And you understand this guy behind the counter because you're like, whoa, that's... I don't know about that. This is not an easy movie in regards to its moral questions, what it's trying to say, or what it might not be saying. It asks questions that are harsh, that are difficult to process. It wants you to think about what role we might have in creating the Joker. It also has questions on its mind about mental health. I mean, he seems to be holding on to a thread when he's still able to go to a therapist. But when the funding for that social work is cut, he can no longer go. And after that, he doesn't even know where to go for his medication. So the film is asking us to think about how we fail people. How is it that we're not paying attention when we should? Or not giving care when we should. Which is why I find it strange that some of the primary detractors of superhero movies that are more disposable and have always asked for something that's a little more ponderous or serious are just as hateful of this. This film is a direct result of all of those superhero fatigue articles that journalists and film critics have been publishing for the past few years. And if you're not happy with this either, then maybe you just don't like comic book movies. Which is fine, and that's totally cool. There's plenty that I don't like either. I'm just saying I feel like there's a lot of hypocrisy going on right now when people discuss comic book films. And it's the kind of thing that I don't usually comment on unless it's really apparent. In my opinion, it is. I would say one of the biggest spoilers in the movie is the idea that this girl that he is seeing in his apartment, he's not actually seeing her. She's there, and they maybe have bumped into each other on the elevator a few times, but there's a scene where after he commits his first murder, he just bursts into her apartment, and the suggestion is that they have sex. And I remember being like, what the fuck? That would never happen. This creepy guy who lives next to you just like opening the door and you guys just start fucking. Like, that makes no fucking sense. And I remember it kind of pissing me off a little bit until they revealed that that was all in his mind. Watching the film a second time, which I did go back and see it a second time yesterday, it's a little more obvious that they just don't do anything with her character to build her up because she's there to comfort him when his mother is sick. She's there to smile at him and give him company when he needs it. And in the case of after his first murder, he's apparently aroused because he imagines going and having sex with this woman. So this is like deeply unsettling psychological trauma. And throughout the film, they suggest that he wants to kill himself. He writes about it in his notebook. He says, I hope that my death makes more sense than my life. He often mimes shooting himself in the head. He gets a gun eventually and pretends to go on the Murray show with Robert De Niro and kill himself in front of the audience. And they're setting this up as if that is what we are to anticipate when he goes on this show. But if you've seen the film, you know that's not what he does. While he's sitting there, he begins to think, I think I'm actually going to kill this guy, this idol of mine. And when he's being taken away by the police, somebody that he inspired crashes into his car and sets him free for a minute, and he has this moment amongst all of these people that he's inspired to forget about the world and all of their cares and just commit crimes, where he's able to stand there and actually feel like people accept him for who he is. And the Waynes are also killed in this moment, and you realize that he inspired the killer to kill the Waynes. We fade out, and I honestly thought the film had ended at this point, but we get another scene where he's in the psych ward and he's being interviewed by someone there, and he's laughing uncontrollably, just like that first scene with the therapist. It's like a nice bookend with the beginning. And she asks him, what's so funny? And he's like, I'm thinking of a joke. And she's like, do you want to tell it to me? And he goes, you wouldn't get it. And you realize he's picturing Bruce Wayne, the little boy, and his parents dead, thinking about how he inspired that. And I wish the film just cut to black right then, because it's a great final line, but we get a little song moment, and then maybe he killed this woman and he's running through the hallway, or he's imagining that he killed this woman and he's running through the hallway. More than likely, he probably killed the woman, or at least hurt her very badly and is now running through the hallway. But I wish it just cut right after that final line, because it's such a great final line, and it makes you think a little bit, because we know the history of what happens next. So is the Joker thinking, I've inspired this horrible thing to happen, and more than likely that will inspire this kid to do something equally horrible or equally great? Is he seeing the irony in that, or does he just think it's really goddamn funny? He might just think it's funny, but the irony is there for anyone who wants to look deeper into it. So despite issues with similarities to other films and some storylines that I didn't 100% love, I think this is about as good of a Joker origin story as we could have hoped for, and I really enjoyed watching the movie, but I do have some things I want to discuss. Just like I did in my original review, I got things on my mind, and I don't usually like to get into this kind of stuff on my YouTube channel, but I think in the case of this movie, it's kind of necessary, and I I like the discussion. When this movie premiered at festivals, many people were concerned about it, as I've said. And there were many critics who jumped on Twitter and said, this is a dangerous film, and it's going to change the world, and it's just a horrible thing for anybody who might want to do something awful, and it will inspire this and that. And I remember thinking to myself, what? Like, are we still having this conversation? Are we still talking about video games and movies are to blame for horrible things that happen in the world? Now look, I know for a fact that somebody saw a movie, somebody saw a game and said, yep, I'm going to do something bad. I'm sure that's happened. I'm positive that's happened. But that's the exception to the rule. And you should never blame the art or the artist for that person's terrible act. It's not their fault. This is the same conversation that film critics, newscasters, and bloggers have been having for decades. When Natural Born Killers came out, there was an absurd amount of controversy over the violence in that movie and what it might inspire. The same for A Clockwork Orange, the same for Taxi Driver, and even more recently with The Dark Knight in 2008. People in the UK were very concerned about its rating and that it wasn't harsh enough for the amount of violence in the film. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom had a lot of controversy because of the heart-ripping out scene and its PG rating. This is never ending. But in the case of this movie, I find it honestly laughable. I am genuinely baffled that anyone saw this movie and thought it was a dangerous film. There have been more violent comic book films in the past few years than Joker. As I said in my original review, Deadpool and Deadpool 2 are both more violent than this movie. It's just that the hero of that film doesn't take it seriously and just thinks it's very funny. Kind of like the Joker. Taxi Driver came out 43 years ago. And as I said, I just rewatched the film, and it is far worse content-wise, holy shit, than Joker. There's a scene where the director himself, Martin Scorsese, is in the movie, in a car, using really harsh language, talking about killing this woman. And it's like, could you imagine if Todd Phillips put himself in Joker as a character that encourages Joker to maybe kill one day? Like, fuck, the world would blow up. Social media would implode if that happened. 43 years ago, okay? This is like nothing. Drive is also more violent, which is similarly about a loner man who is done wrong in a certain way and kind of just loses it. This is by no means new, and I have a theory. Critics love hyperbole. You get quotes when you use hyperbole. Did you know that I've actually never been quoted? I've never been quoted in a trailer or a Blu-ray release or a poster. Nothing. And I kind of like it, actually. I kind of like that I've never been quoted, that I know of. But social media, especially Twitter, they reward you for extremes. The more extreme you are, the more attention you get. And when you come out of a Joker screening and say it's going to blow up the world, then you get all this attention. But it's not the kind of attention I would ever want. The last thing I want to say about this is on the character of Batman. We all know that when he was a boy, his parents were killed right in front of him, and because of this and the crime in his city and how bad things had become, he decides to train himself to become Batman, a vigilante, somebody who dresses up like a fucking bat and beats the shit out of criminals. That's a character taking tragedy and using it to find a good path that is still filled with a lot of bad shit, as the best Batman films have shown us. And for some reason, we seem more okay with that. The idea of taking the tragedy of a character and showing this affect them with a positive outcome. That's always nice to see, of course. But it's also a lot less realistic. The Joker is essentially the same as Batman, he just goes the wrong route. He was affected by tragedy and chooses the wrong path. And for whatever reason, for some, this is morally ambiguous, and I don't see it that way at all. I see it as a more realistic portrayal of what could happen to someone who is dealt a lot of tragedies in life. And that's the contrast of Batman and the Joker. That's the interesting juxtaposition for these characters. Why is it that we're so acceptive of somebody who deals with the same shit just in a different way? Because he doesn't kill random people? I get that. But that's the fucking point. This is the creation of a supervillain. Just as M. Night Shyamalan's Split was also the creation of a supervillain. This is nothing new. And it genuinely fucking floors me that anybody thought it was. Now, one last thing I do want to say, which I probably should have said earlier because some people like to pause the video and leave a comment without actually hearing everything I have to say. If you didn't like this movie, I totally understand that. I'm just saying, like, the pre-release hysteria I find horrifically stupid. That's all. Like, if you saw the movie, had a genuine reaction, didn't like the movie, whatever, that's normal. I mean, I've been talking about opinions on this website for 10 years now, so I'm totally used to people who are adverse to mine. That's totally fine. It's the pre-release hysteria hype that just fucking, I was like, this is stupid. I just hope that we don't do that again. I would love if we wouldn't do that again. Please don't do that again. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching. Look forward to more reviews very soon. I'm curious to know what you all thought of Joker. Thank you guys as always. If you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.